In a distant forest, where pine trees touched the clouds and rivers sang their eternal songs, lived a grizzly bear named Bruno. He was unlike other bears. Instead of growling and scaring everyone around, Bruno loved to help. He could spend hours watching ants build their tiny homes or listening to the wind whisper secrets to the trees. His calm demeanor and kind heart set him apart from his kin, who didn't always understand his peculiar interests. But Bruno paid no attention to their bewilderment. He simply did what he believed was right. One day, while wandering through the forest, Bruno noticed that he had begun to understand the language of all living creatures. The birds told him about distant lands, the squirrels shared their worries, and even the ants greeted him as he passed by. It was an extraordinary gift he had received from the old spirit of the forest. The spirit had once appeared to him in the form of an ancient tree and said, "Your kindness is your strength." From that day on, Bruno became not just a bear, but a true protector of the forest and its inhabitants. He helped birds build their nests when the wind blew them off the branches, comforted hares frightened by thunderstorms, and even persuaded wolves not to attack weaker animals. The forest dwellers began to trust him, knowing that Bruno would always come to their aid. His kindness and ability to understand others made him not just a part of the forest, but its heart. And although he was a grizzly, big and strong, his strength lay not in his claws and teeth, but in his ability to listen, understand, and care. One morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the dense tree canopies, Bruno heard a faint, barely audible cry. He stopped, listened carefully, and following the sound, soon discovered a little hare. It was sitting under a bush, trembling all over. Its paws were shaking, and its long ears drooped helplessly. The little hare introduced himself as Oliver and explained that he had gotten lost in the forest and couldn't find his way home. Fear was evident in his eyes, but upon seeing the kind bear, he calmed down a little. Bruno smiled softly and, leaning down, said, "Don't be afraid, I'll help you." He carefully lifted Oliver onto his back so the little one could rest, and slowly moved forward. Along the way, the bear told the little hare how important it is to be attentive in the forest. "Listen to the sound of the wind," he said, "and the singing of the birds. They will always tell you where it's safe and where you need to be careful." Oliver, snuggled against Bruno's soft fur, listened carefully, trying to remember every word. Soon, they came upon a narrow path that, as it turned out, led straight to the little hare's home. Oliver joyfully leapt up upon seeing the familiar surroundings and dashed toward his burrow. He turned to Bruno to thank him, but the bear was already smiling, watching the happy little hare. A sense of satisfaction warmed his heart. Another good deed had been done. The forest grew quiet once more, but now it held a little more light and warmth. One day, while walking along the river, Bruno noticed that the bees from the hive were behaving unusually. They buzzed anxiously, swirling around their destroyed home. It turned out that after a heavy rain, their hive had collapsed and fallen apart. The bees, left without shelter, didn't know where to fly or where to gather honey now. Seeing their confusion, Bruno couldn't stand aside. He understood how important these little workers were for the forest. Without them, the flowers would remain unpollinated, and the trees would lack sweet fruits. The bear pondered how to help the bees and suddenly remembered that nearby, deep in the forest, there was an old tree with a large hollow. It had been empty for a long time and could become the perfect new home for the bees. Bruno carefully approached the destroyed hive and, trying not to disturb the insects, offered them his help. Sensing the bear's good intentions, the bees agreed to follow him. He carefully carried them to their new home, making sure not to harm a single bee. When they reached the tree, the bees immediately began inspecting the hollow. It turned out to be spacious, cozy, and secure, the perfect spot for a new hive. In gratitude for his help, the bees treated Bruno to fresh honey, which he gladly tasted. The sweet flavor warmed his heart, but even more, he was happy that he could help his little friends. Bruno walked away, glancing back at the tree where work was already in full swing. The bees were settling into their new home, and the forest around them continued to live its usual life. The bear understood that his help was important not only for the bees but for the entire forest, as every part of it, even the smallest, played its role in this harmony. One evening, when the sun had already disappeared below the horizon and the forest had fallen into silence, Bruno heard a strange sound. It wasn't the usual rustling of leaves or the call of a bird, but a quiet yet distinct cry. The bear became alert and slowly moved toward the sound. Among the trees, he saw a boy sitting on a large rock. The boy, whose name was Tommy, looked confused and frightened. He was crying, unsure of where to go or how to find his way back home. Bruno cautiously moved closer. Tommy, noticing the huge bear, was initially frightened and wanted to run away, but something stopped him. He looked into Bruno's eyes and saw not a threat, but warmth and kindness. The bear slowly extended his paw, and the boy, overcoming his fear, took it. Bruno gently pulled Tommy along, showing that he wanted to help. They walked through the forest, and Bruno began showing the boy how to navigate in the wild. He pointed to the moss growing on the northern side of the trees and explained that it could be a clue for determining direction. Then the bear stopped and raised his head, pointing to the stars that had begun to appear in the sky. It was as if Bruno wanted to say that the stars could also be guides in the darkness. Tommy listened and watched carefully, trying to remember every detail. When they finally reached the edge of the forest, Tommy saw the lights of his house in the distance. He turned to Bruno and hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of the bear comforting him. The boy promised himself that he would never forget this encounter and the kindness the forest giant had shown him. Bruno, standing at the edge of the woods, watched as Tommy ran toward the house, and something resembling a smile gleamed in his eyes. The forest fell silent once more, but now it held a story that would forever bind the boy and the bear together. One day, the forest inhabitants gathered together to throw a celebration in honor of Bruno. Everyone knew that without his help, many of them would not have been able to overcome their difficulties. The hares brought fresh carrots, the bees brought fragrant honey, and the birds, flocking together, performed a beautiful song that echoed throughout the forest. Even the squirrels brought their stash of nuts, and the hedgehogs decorated the clearing with bright flowers. Everyone wanted to express their gratitude to the big and kind Grizzly. Bruno, sitting in the center of the clearing, looked at his friends and felt his heart fill with warmth. He hadn't expected such attention and was moved to tears. In that moment, he realized that the kindness he had given to others was returning to him 100-fold. It not only helped those in need but also made him truly happy. After all, the joy he saw in his friends' eyes was the greatest reward for him. When the celebration was in full swing, an ancient spirit of the forest appeared in the air. Its figure, as if woven from light and leaves, slowly approached Bruno. All the animals fell silent, sensing the presence of an ancient power. The spirit looked at the grizzly and said, "You have proven that even the biggest and strongest can be the kindest. Your heart, full of care and compassion, has become an example for all the inhabitants of this forest." These words sounded like a blessing, and Bruno felt that his path had been the right one. The celebration lasted until sunset. The animals danced, laughed, and shared stories about how Bruno had helped each of them. And when the stars lit up the sky, they all looked up together, feeling that their forest had become even stronger and more united thanks to the kindness of one big grizzly. The story of Bruno, the kind grizzly bear, spread far beyond the forest. Rumors of a bear who was always ready to help were passed from mouth to mouth. People living in nearby villages told each other about the unusual animal who not only caused no harm but also saved those in trouble. His kindness and responsiveness became legendary, and even those who had never seen Bruno knew of his noble deeds. One day, an old sage came to the forest. His long gray beard and piercing gaze revealed a man who had seen much in his lifetime. He walked for a long time until he found Bruno, who at that moment was helping a little hare that had gotten tangled in thorny bushes. The sage watched this with a smile, and when Bruno freed the hare, he approached the bear and said, "You have taught us all an important lesson. Kindness and helping others make the world a better place. Your actions inspire not only the animals but also people." Bruno nodded modestly, lowering his head. He had never sought fame or recognition, but he understood that his actions truly made a difference in this world. The sage, smiling, added, "You have shown that even the strongest can be the kindest. This is a lesson for all of us." With these words, he departed, leaving Bruno to ponder his words. Since then, the forest became even kinder. Inspired by Bruno's example, the animals began to help each other, share food, and support one another in difficult times. Even those who used to quarrel now tried to find common ground. Bruno continued his work without expecting gratitude, but seeing how his actions inspired others. The forest, which was once just a home for many animals, became a place where mutual understanding and care reigned. People, learning about Bruno, also began to change. They started helping each other more often, caring for nature and animals. The story of the kind grizzly reminded them that even a small act could make the world a better place. And Bruno, as always, remained a symbol of kindness, showing everyone that strength lies not in size or power, but in the willingness to lend a helping paw to those in need. Even years later, Bruno remained true to himself. His life in the forest was steady but never dull. Each day brought something new. Sometimes a little hare would get lost in the thicket, or a bird would break its wing, or an old oak would creak under the weight of time. And every time, Bruno would come to the rescue, never expecting gratitude. His kindness became legendary, and the animals, big and small, knew that in times of trouble, they could rely on the big bear with a warm heart. The forest, which was once filled with anxiety and misunderstanding, had now become a place where peace and harmony reigned. The animals had learned to live side by side, helping one another, and much of this was thanks to Bruno. He not only protected the weak but also taught them to be brave, kind, and compassionate. His words, simple yet wise, resonated in the hearts of all the forest's inhabitants. Even the most stubborn and willful animals could not resist his sincerity. Despite his size and strength, Bruno always remained a child at heart. He believed in miracles, in the idea that every day could bring something magical. Sometimes he would notice a sunbeam breaking through the dense foliage or the morning mist enveloping the forest like a soft blanket, and in those moments, his heart would fill with joy. He knew that his strength lay not in his claws or teeth, but in his kind heart, which could melt even the coldest ice. And this belief made him not just a big bear, but a true friend to everyone who knew him. One winter day, when the forest was gripped by frost, Bruno found a frozen wolf cub. The little one was shivering from the cold, and his eyes were filled with fear. Without hesitation, Bruno wrapped him in his warm fur and carried him to his den. He warmed the cub, fed him, and told him a story about how he himself had once been small and helpless. By morning, the wolf cub had grown stronger, and gratitude shone in his eyes. From that day on, he became Bruno's loyal friend, and their friendship became yet another proof that kindness can work miracles. And so the days passed, filled with cares and joys. Bruno continued on his path, bringing light and warmth to everyone he met along the way. And although he never sought fame, his name became a symbol of hope and kindness in the forest, where everyone knew that miracles were possible if you believed in them. Bruno's story reminds us that kindness is not just a beautiful word, but an action that requires effort and sincerity. Everyone who encountered this gentle grizzly understood that even a small act of care can be the beginning of significant change. Bruno did not seek fame or rewards, he simply did what he believed was right, helping those in need of his support. His example shows that kindness is not the privilege of a chosen few, but a choice available to everyone. In a world filled with so much hustle and selfishness, it's important to remember that even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life. Helping a neighbor, caring for nature, or simply offering a word of support, all of this can become the very magic that the old forest spirit spoke of. Kindness is the magic that lives within each of us, he would say, and Bruno proved it through his actions. Each of us can become a little like Bruno if we pay more attention to those around us, if we learn to see those in need of help, and if we do not remain indifferent. After all, kindness is not just about grand deeds, but also about small yet important steps that make the world a better place. And, as Bruno's story shows, it is precisely such steps that create real magic, capable of transforming everything around us.